This is KTVO's Good Morning Heartland.
And welcome back. We've long heard of the lasting damage done by both diabetes and hypertension, the loss of feeling, loss of limbs, loss of eyesight, and kidney damage. But a recent study suggests that memory might need to be added to the list. Today we have Dr. Justin Puckett from Complete Family Medicine here to break it down to us. How are you doing?
Doing well. Good morning.
So first of all, go ahead and tell us how diabetes damages limbs, eyes, and even kidneys.
Okay, yeah. So we think of diabetes as being both a macrovascular, so it affects the big arteries, and also, and veins for that matter, and also a microvascular, so all the little tiny arteries that supply blood to our kidneys, to our eyes, to the ends of our hands and feet, and also the small nerve fibers that get fed from those small arteries aren't well fed, so they start to have damage from the high blood sugars. And so as there's damage to both the vascular system and the nervous system, then those things can have damage and stop functioning. So that's why diabetics, it's so important to get eye exams, to check blood work and urine tests to make sure that their kidneys aren't being affected, and then to be very careful about not injuring their feet and hands, because that numbness can really be profound.
So tell us a little bit more about this recent study that just came out.
Yeah, so the recent study took 1,400 seniors who were mostly in their 80s, and what they did was they went backwards and looked at those folks who had diabetes diagnosed in their mid-ages, so somewhere in their 40s, versus those who had been diagnosed later in life. They gave them a memory test, and then they also did MRIs on all of them. And when they went back and looked, they saw that those who had diabetes earlier in life had smaller brains. Their whole brain was actually 2.9% smaller, and their hippocampus, the part that's responsible for short and long-term memory, or at least partially responsible, had shrunk by 4%. They also then saw on the MRI that those with earlier diabetes had more mini strokes found throughout their brain, and many of these folks weren't even aware that they had strokes, but they had several strokes in small areas of the brain that didn't cause the major go to the hospital symptoms, but did cause enough damage that it might have limited memory. And so their conclusion was that there certainly could be a connection between getting diabetes earlier in life and memory problems later in life.
Interesting. Now you had just mentioned about, when you were talking about the survey, is midlife diabetes. What is that, and why should we be worried, or why is it important?
Well, the damage from diabetes is cumulative. So the earlier you're diagnosed and the longer that you're uncontrolled, the more damage that can be done. So somebody who's diagnosed whenever they're 75 is a diabetic, and they work hard to control it with diet and exercise, probably not going to see some of these major effects from the diabetes themselves. But somebody who's diagnosed in their 30s or 40s, or even somebody who develops diabetes in their 30s and 40s and isn't diagnosed until they're in their 50s because they're just healthy and going and don't recognize a lot of the symptoms, that damage there is done and is more cumulative.
So now, are you convinced that all diabetics will have some sort of memory loss?
Well, this is another example of a study that gives us a little bit of question of cause and effect. And we can't say with any, it sure is suggestive that uncontrolled diabetes can lead to memory problems, and I think that there's probably enough there for us to hang our hat on it. But just because there's it doesn't necessarily create a cause and effect relationship. But what it does do, I think, more importantly, is tell us that, hey, we need to be seeing the doctor regularly. If we have any symptoms of diabetes, we need to be getting tested. If we develop diabetes, especially early in life, we need to be working a little more aggressively to control our blood sugars, and then later in life, we actually kind of let that threshold drift up a bit. But it's that time interval from diagnosis or even from development. So if you've got metabolic syndrome, which is those folks that carry some extra weight around their belly, high blood pressure, and cholesterol problems, those folks really need to be, the alarm is firing. You need to be getting active. You need to be and move yourself away from that diabetes, because if you can delay its progression, development 10 years, you might save yourself some of these memory issues as well as all the other stuff we talked about.
Interesting. So for those that aren't really familiar with diabetes, obviously there's different types. Now, is diabetes genetic? Like, if my parents have it, am I at a higher risk of getting diabetes?
There certainly is it's not single gene, so it's not, we can't do normal we remember doing Mendelian genetics, and
Right.
we can't. It's not like that, but there certainly can be genetic predisposition. So certain genes that you might get from mom or dad can make you more likely to develop it. But I love that example of those sorts of genetic contributions that we get from our parents can often be overcome by our diet and lifestyle. So getting active, staying active, and eating healthy is key to many things.
Now, you had mentioned earlier about, overweight people or high cholesterol. Are there any other contributions that play a role and factor into getting diabetes?
Well, some people get diabetes and they can be very skinny, and especially type 2 is what we're talking about, that adult onset or later onset. The inactivity and eating too many carbs. So, and then there's some women have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which can contribute to insulin resistance, which over time can contribute to diabetes. So every person ought to be doing their blood work regularly, having that talk with hey doc, where am I at risk of developing diabetes?
Okay, interesting. Well, what we'll do is we'll post everything on our website at heartlandconnection.com. We'll link up Dr. Puckett's information with Complete Family Medicine, and we'll be right back.